already open. So with that, welcome to Fix a Fair at Home. Thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Wing. I'm one of the coordinators of the Fix a Fairs, which are City of Portland, Oregon community resource events. And with that, I would like to welcome our guest, Heather from Portland Farmers Market. Thank you for joining us, Heather. Take it away.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Wing, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Heather Morrill. I work for Portland Farmers Market, and we run the year-round farmers market at the Portland State University every Saturday. So you can always come and see us there. This series features winter vegetables and foods that you'll find at the winter farmers market. So that's the place to go to find these goodies, or whatever your neighborhood winter farmers market is. I am also a member of Cook First Portland, and we are a group of home cooks, culinary educators, and advocates who believe in the power of home cooking. So we want to inspire you to cook more, to start wherever you're at, use what you've got. Don't worry about the recipe too much. It's okay to go off script. We want you to make and share food with others, and most importantly, just enjoy it. You can learn more at cookfirstpdx.org or follow us on Instagram at cookfirstpdx. And today we're really excited. I want to let you know we're probably going to run over time. We have so many wonderful demonstrations. So the first video that Wing will play talks about the Double Up Food Buck program. And we're excited to feature hazelnuts today because it's one of those maybe lesser known products that you can buy with Double Up Food Bucks. So raw, unprocessed nuts in the farmer's market can be purchased with Double Up Food Bucks. So we've got a 2.5-minute video that talks about how that program works. And then three dishes to cover every meal of the day. We've got a wonderful granola, a hearty winter spring transitional salad that includes hazelnuts, and then a guest chef who's coming in to show you a really delicious cookie recipe that uses local grains and hazelnuts. So you can find all of the recipes under the Peak Season Recipes tab at cookfirstpdx.org. And again, today it's about 45 minutes to cover all of our recipe demonstrations, and then we'll be back. Wing and I will be back after that for a quick Q&A. If you've got anything you want to ask, please type it in so we can get to it after we play the recipe demonstration. So thanks again for being here. Really excited to share these recipes with you.
Sorry, technical difficulties here, folks. Bear with me.
All right, I'm here to talk about how you can use your Oregon Trail card to shop farmers markets this winter. That'd be PSU Farmers Market on Saturdays at the Portland State University campus, but many other winter market locations in the state. You could find all of them at doubleuporegon.org. And what happens at the farmers market is you're able to take your SNAP benefits from your card, and the market will provide a SNAP match. The SNAP match comes in the form of Double Up Food Buck currency. So what you'd want to do is grab your card, find the information booth where the folks will be able to slide your card and remove benefits from your card. The benefits that come off of your card will come in the form of $1 tokens, and these you can think of as your benefits. Anything you could buy in the grocery store with SNAP. You can buy in the farmer's market with SNAP. So that'd be fruits and vegetables, but also a bottle of kombucha, a loaf of bread, a pastry to take home and eat. Those are the things that you can purchase with your SNAP benefits in the farmer's market. Additionally, what's going to happen at the information booth is up to $10, they will provide a SNAP match. And the SNAP match is a free extra amount of money, up to $10 per week, that comes in the form of Double Up food bucks. And Double Up food bucks, on the back side of them, you can see this list, and you can also read about it at doubleuporegon.org. These Double Up food bucks are for fresh fruits and vegetables, but that includes mushrooms and beans and herbs in the springtime, vegetable starts, and raw and unprocessed nuts. So Double Up food bucks is for more fresh fruits and vegetables. It helps support the farmers. It's a match, a free $10 for you to go with the money that you pull off of your Oregon Trail card. And you could do that again at many farmers market locations year round. But if you wanted to look up the list, you go to doubleuporegon.org. Okay, today we're gonna make a really just simple granola, which takes advantage. It uses rolled oats that are coming from the winter farmers market. They're available year round, but something wonderful to have. And hazelnuts, so a wonderful Oregon farm product at the farmers market. Again, available year round from certain farmers, but it's got its peak season of harvest in fall, and we see them, vendors bring them to the market, farmers have them through the winter season for sure. Multiple farmers have them. So I am going to preheat my oven to 250, because with the name of the game with granola is just a really like low and slow bake. So 250. We'll get the oven preheated, and then I can prepare my ingredients. I've got a big mixing bowl, and for this recipe, it's a smaller batch of granola, really to serve like 1 or 2 people, but it's a great recipe to scale up. It's something that will keep in the cupboard if you put it in a glass jar with a lid, or something that will be airtight. You can keep it for a while. But for this recipe, I've got 2 cups of rolled oats. I've got my cup of hazelnuts. I haven't chopped these yet, so I'll probably need some more. I've got a cup of hazelnuts. And this is really another one of those, use whatever you've got or whatever you like. If you've got other nuts, or some of these ingredients are listed as optional that you'd like to include or exclude in your granola, go for it. Something else to think about is how finely you want to chop your nuts. I like having some bigger pieces and bigger bites in there. But I'm going through these hazelnuts with a pretty sharp knife and getting them all cut like at least twice. So there will be some smaller shaved pieces and some bigger, heartier bites. Add those to my bowl. Chop them finer if you like. It's something you could experiment with. Also, walnuts are a great addition. You could take the proportions and use a mixture of different kinds of nuts. Cashews are really wonderful in granola. That's one of my favorites. But hazelnuts and walnuts would be our locally grown nuts you can find in the farmer's market. I am next going to I'm gonna put in some shredded coconut. This is something I use and sometimes something I don't. I've got a sweetened coconut. I'm gonna add that into the mixture. That was approximately a quarter of a cup, but again, really you can use whatever you'd like to do to get the proportions that you enjoy. And then I've got 3 tablespoons of dark brown sugar. I'm gonna sprinkle on top of that. And maple syrup also makes a wonderful sweetener, or you can use honey. You could take these proportions, everything is pretty flexible, and use that 3 tablespoon amount for whatever sweetener you'd like to use. It will work out. Don't stress too much about exact proportions. I've got coconut oil here is what I like to use. It complements the flavors of the nuts and the fact that I'm using shredded coconut, and I like the flavor of it. So I melted it. It was 3 tablespoons of coconut oil. I melted it in the microwave, and I'm actually going to give my dry ingredients a little mix before I toss in the oil. I'm also going to add the salt. This recipe calls for 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So not too much. Again, I eyeballed that. I'll toss these ingredients and then slowly, or at least spreading it out, and slowly pour the coconut oil to get all of it out of your bowl, out of your small little bowl. I melted the coconut oil, and I'll just get that nice and coated on all the oats and ingredients. In here. Another option for this recipe is to use some dried fruit like raisins or dried cranberries, craisins. That will be something that will add after it's done baking. I have a little chunk from my brown sugar that I'm going to pull out. Do I have another one? Another little chunk of brown sugar that I'm just going to pull out so I don't have that bite. Too sweet. You can also adjust and add more sweetener to this recipe. I don't like my granola terribly sweet, so I'm kind of, I wouldn't call it under sweetening, but there's not that much sweetener in here. And that's a nice thing you get to do when you're cooking at home. Like, you get to control those elements if you want it sweeter or saltier or less sweet than what you probably find in a packaged grocery store granola. And I've got my cookie sheet, like a nice big sheet pan compared to what I've prepared for my granola, because I want a really nice thin layer for it to toast in the oven. I'm going to give it a coat of coconut oil just straight onto the pan, and I am going to do that with my hand because the coconut oil is thick and spoonable, but it is going to melt with my body temperature. I also do this when I butter pans, when I make pie or bake bread or anything. I just use my fingers. My hands are clean. I washed them before I started. I'll have to wash them again after. But spread a layer of coconut oil onto our sheet pan. Try to leave the extra on the pan. Why not? Take it off of my hand. Oh, some of the sugar and the oil got stuck to the spatula on my spoon. I can also even see the salt, which is an important ingredient that we want to be combined. So I'm going to knock that off with a spoon. Make sure to actually mix it into the oven. I'm always tempted to just start eating it now, but I know that it'll be even better after it's cooked in the oven. I spread it out on the pan, and I'm going to give it a shake to really just evenly coat it. You can use a spatula to move it around if you need to. I think shaking it makes it more even. I'll come and show you. This is my beautiful sheet pan that's getting ready to go in the oven as soon as it's preheated to 250. It's not quite there yet, but I'll pop it in because I know it's getting close. And with this recipe, about every 15 minutes for an hour and 15 minutes, I'm just going to take the pan out and give it a stir so that it's browning most evenly. But here it goes, it's preheated, great timing, into the oven. We've had our first 15 minutes in the oven. I can smell the flavors of the granola, the aroma, and I'm going to give it its first stir. So I'm going to just use my spatula to toss the ingredients, and we're doing this just so it gets a nice even brown as it's toasting in the oven. And then I shake it to flatten it back out again. And put it back in there. And I'll come back every 15 minutes just until it's got a nice brown coating and is finished toasting. All right, it's been 30 minutes now that our granola has been in the oven. So we're giving it a second stir. And I wanted to show you how it's been progressing. So it's getting darker brown. I'm going to stir it. And then shake the tray to flatten it back out so it's getting evenly toasted. And back in the oven for 15-minute increments. We're going for about an hour and 15 minutes total. Yes, it has been an hour and 25 minutes that our granola has been in the oven at 250, and it is ready. It has gotten nice and toasty. You could always make it more brown and toasted if you preferred, but it's still hot, but that's a really beautiful, crispy. Look at those shreds of coconut got nice and toasty, and so have the oats. We're ready to eat after it cools down. All right, our granola has cooled. I'm gonna put back in our mixing bowl. At this point, you could toss in any dried fruit. The recipe has the option of raisins or craisins. I've got some dried cranberries here that'll fold in evenly. We talked about storage. This could go in a mason jar, you know, with a screw top lid or any airtight like container. It'll last on the counter. I'm really excited to have a bite. All right, we've got a hearty winter salad that we're going to make. And so I've pretty finely chopped my hazelnuts, and now we're going to toast them before we add them to a salad dressing and then put them directly onto our winter salad. And we want these spread pretty evenly in the bottom of the pan, so I gave it a little shake. And we'll let those babies toast until they get nice and browned. Pan is on a pretty low heat, and I'm keeping the hazelnuts moving around so that they get toasted and not burned, but they are browning up nicely. All right, these were maybe on a little bit too high of heat. I turned them down more to low, and I'm keeping them stirring because I don't want them to burn. I just want them to get nice and browned and toasty. You can be tempted to walk away from them and think that you'll just come back, but you kind of need to babysit them and keep stirring so that they get nice and browned and not burned. And it's been 7 minutes that I've been toasting these, and they're looking nice and browned. I'll put them in a jar or a container so you can see them. And here are our toasted hazelnuts. They've got some nice toasty brown parts, and we'll use them to make a salad dressing and top our salad, our winter salad. So today we're going to make a hearty winter salad. I'm kind of winter transitioning into spring salad. It's going to have hazelnuts both on top and in a dressing that I'm going to make. And it's got roasted butternut squash, just diced into little pieces. It's roasting in the oven. Right now, the oven's at 425, and diced, cubed up butternut squash is gonna roast for about 15 or 20 minutes until the edges start to get brown. And those will be the main ingredients, along with pear or apple, if you like, and some kale and greens. Those will be the ingredients of a hearty winter salad that could almost be a full lunch, or make a full meal out of it really easily by just adding another side for dinner. I'm going to do 2 different dressings. This will be our first dressing that actually has hazelnuts in the dressing. It includes using a little food processor. I'll also make a hearty winter salad dressing that does not need to use a food processor if you don't have this piece of equipment. So I have toasted my hazelnuts, and I'm going to add, chopped and toasted, I'm going to add half of what I've got here to be a part of the dressing. The rest of them I'm going to keep, and they're going to top my salad. Then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of chopped red onion, quickly chopped. So it's going into the food processor. I've measured out 2 tablespoons of water, 4.5 teaspoons of balsamic vinegar, 4.5 teaspoons of sugar. We need 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Got my nice flaky sea salt. I'm going to do a garlic clove, just really quickly cut off the bottom of it. Give a little smash with my knife and throw it into the food processor. And the olive oil, I'm going to add a little bit. I've got 1/2 cup, but really it's going to be added and incorporated as these things start to blend together. So that's why this comes out of the food processor. We'll let that run. So we've got a nice consistency. Really, we were just letting those hazelnuts get chopped up. You can always, this is for me at home. I can put my finger in it. Give it a little taste, salt it to taste if needed. I think that's one of those skills That definitely did not come naturally to me. I had to like work to develop that by having little tastes of things and adding a little bit sprinkle of more and more salt until it has that like nice little zing, but don't overdo it. I'm gonna give this a couple more pulses just to let it, just to get those nuts a little bit finer. That's a delicious dressing. Especially if you like balsamic vinaigrette. You'll like this one. We'll make a second dressing that's super simple, doesn't have balsamic and doesn't require the food processor, but this is our first dressing to go on our salad. So our diced butternut squash has been in the oven, so I'm going to pull that out to let it cool and then prepare another salad dressing and get our salad going. The butternut squash has gotten nice and soft, and it's got some brown edges and sides. Just want to pull it out so we can have a moment to cool down here on the table. And I wanted to give you the option just of another salad dressing that is good with winter salads, and another, make your own. You'll want to pick whatever vinegar you prefer. So in this second salad dressing, we're going to use apple cider vinegar, which may be something you more readily have on hand. It's going to be 1/4 of a cup of apple cider vinegar. And one of my favorite things to do is just to toss the ingredients into a mason jar. I'll put the lid on top and then you can just give it a shake, and it's already in a vessel to keep in the refrigerator for future salads. So don't be afraid to make a bigger batch or a smaller batch. So we've got our apple cider vinegar in there, and we're going to do 2 teaspoons of whole grain mustard. And I am, you'll see I am not worrying so much about exact measurements with salad dressing. 2 teaspoons of maple syrup or honey as a sweetener. I'm just going to squeeze this directly into my jar. And the recipe calls for 2 teaspoons. This is something I'm going to cater more to my taste and try 1 teaspoon to start, because I can always add more honey or sweetener, but I won't be able to take it away. 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, which is just a couple pinches. 1/8 of a teaspoon of fresh ground black pepper. And again, I'm not measuring it, I'm eyeballing it. I do like pepper a lot, so I'm not afraid to overdo it with fresh ground black pepper. And then our olive oil. I've got 1/4 a cup of olive oil already measured out. And this is another great option for a winter salad dressing. And what I mean when I say a winter salad is it's just those heartier greens that you'll find in the fall and the winter. And then as winter progresses, we'll start to get some more tender greens like spinach and arugula. And both of these salad dressings work really well for both of those. And there it is, just shaken in my jar. It will separate when I keep it in the refrigerator, but I'll just pull it out, shake it again, and add it to my salads. All right, we are going to assemble our winter salad, which starts off with our dino kale here. I'm I'm going to chop it. I'm leaving the rib in there. I don't mind. I like that hearty bite of salad with my kale, but I am chopping it pretty small. And then there's a technique that I would say is optional, but I'll do this with my salad today. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of lemon on my chopped kale, and I'm going to put just a little bit of my dressing in there, because what I want to do is massage the kale. When people talk about massaging kale, it's a real thing. Massage the lemon juice and a little bit of olive oil, or a little bit of the dressing that you're going to use into the leaves. And you can see the leaves, they change color as they get the oil and the acid from the lemon on them. But it just tenderizes them a little bit. It's not something that you have to do when you're making a kale salad, but we've got our massaged kale. Leave in the bottom of the bowl. So the next thing that we're going to add are our beautiful greens. So this is a mixture. It's got some kale in it as well, and some of the greens that are starting to show up at the farmer's market that are more, these are more tender greens, right? The kale is a really hearty green. There's some different arugulas, a kale, there's a chard leaf. This is like a very classic salad mix that you'll find in the farmer's market this time of year. There'll be spinach as the season moves on. There'll be some of those tender greens. If they're bigger pieces, I'll tear them into bite-sized pieces. I'm going to add some slivered onion, red onion. Now the kale and the salad greens and the red onion are in here. And now I'm going to toss it with our delicious hazelnut dressing, hazelnut balsamic vinegar. And right now I'm just sprinkling it, drizzling it around the bowl. And then I'm going to toss it to really thoroughly mix it in there. And I'll maybe add more salad dressing as needed. But I want the leaves of these greens to be nice and coated, so we get the hazelnut flavor and the balsamic flavor throughout. And if you put too much dressing in there, you can add some more greens on top. The onions will tend to try to fall to the bottom. Just toss it so you get a nice even coat on the leaves of your salad. I'm going to put it in my bowl or on my plate that you'd be serving to folks. Make sure you get red onions in there. And I'm going to keep adding. I've got some other delicious ingredients still that you'll find in the winter farmer's market. So I've got my diced butternut squash. Sometimes they fall on the ground. I'll add on top for some good winter bites. And pear. A delicious addition to salad is an apple or a pear. You can dice it up, or what I'm going to do with this pear is cut it as thinly as possible. So this is a red Anjou pear from the farmer's market this past weekend. had the flat side down on the cutting board. I just got really thin little pieces, I'd say like less than 1/4 of an inch slices. Add those on top. Decide your proportions, what you like. I like a lot of pear. At first it seemed like a little bit too much, but then I realized it looked wonderful. I've got some toasted hazelnuts left over from earlier. I didn't add them all to my dressing, so it gets sprinkled on top. And I'm gonna finish this with another drizzle of the dressing. To make sure that the pears and the butternut squash get what I made. Get some of the love of the salad dressing. Here's my beautiful winter salad. Dried raisins or cranberries could be something that you add to this. You could try it out with different winter squashes. What's nice about the pear and the squash in there is it's something for your fork to dive into. And I cannot wait to try this hazelnut balsamic dressing on here. I'm gonna keep eating the salad, but I'll see you soon. All right, today in the Cook First Kitchen, we've got a special guest. Katie Gourley is with us. She is a baker and a grain nerd and a farmer, and we're so pleased to have her here to make cookies for us. She bakes cakes, and you can follow her on Instagram at Katie Gourley and see what she's up to and follow her adventures. Thank you, Katie, for being here. Take it away.
Hello. So today we're going to be making a super simple whole grain hazelnut shortbread cookie. I am a huge believer in shortbread being the best vessel to explore different combinations of whole grain baking and sourcing local and regional grains. Basically because shortbread is your grain or your nut and butter, and I think butter is the best carrier to experience the flavor of grains or a nut. So you'll notice that this recipe is basically just butter, grain, and a nut. And this is a recipe that I thought about bringing to y'all today because one thing I've worked a lot on as a baker in translating my love of our Oregon landscapes and our regionally available food supply is thinking about how to replace almonds in recipes. I am of Italian descent, and a lot of our baking centers around almonds, and so I've always had this kind of internal conflict around sourcing almonds for recipes. And a really awesome fact is that Oregon is the country's biggest producer of hazelnuts, and so one thing I really like to empower bakers with is thinking about the really easy swap to make in a recipe from almonds to hazelnuts. And so this is a recipe that introduces the concept of baking with hazelnut as your kind of staple nut. I also encourage you to explore if you're baking with a cake or a scone that calls for almonds or a different nut, and you have these really beautiful hazelnuts available to you. It's really easy to swap one for one. So that's what we're gonna do today. And we're using whole grain rye flour from Lonesome Whistle at the farmer's market. And this recipe could also be made with an equal amount by weight of any other whole grain flour. My favorite way to make this cookie is also with buckwheat. That was kind of the original way I fell in love with this cookie recipe. So you could replace, again, and I'll talk this through, but you can replace any grain or any flour. You could even use all-purpose flour in an equal 1-to-1 replacement by weight. So each grain is going to be a different amount in cups. than it is in a weight. So that's why this recipe originally is all given by weights, but I'll talk through converting it to cups later. So we're gonna just get started with weighing out our dry ingredients, which is gonna be hazelnuts, rye flour, sugar, and salt, and that's it. So we've got our hazelnuts first, and we're gonna start with 186 grams. Another really easy way to remember this recipe without even having to write it down is it's equal parts nut and flour and equal parts sugar and butter. That's it. So lots of very simple math. So we're gonna get 186 grams of nuts weighed out here. That's a little bit too much. And, cool. Okay, so we've got 186 grams of hazelnuts, and we're just gonna see roughly how much that is in cups before pulsing it into a pretty fine meal. We're gonna be using a food processor to do this, but a workaround if you might not have this piece of equipment would be to buy hazelnut meal, which is available from some nut growers. If in a real pinch, you could probably really chop the heck out of your nuts. So this is a half a cup. Let's see. Yeah, I would say it is about a cup and a half nuts. And you can be a little forgiving. So this is about the consistency that I grind my nuts into. So there's some little bits of whole nut. I'll show it to you closer. You can see there's still some texture to it. You want to have a little caution when food processing nuts because there's a point at which it goes from meal or nut flour to nut butter, and the fats will start to separate. So just keep an eye on it and don't walk away while it's running. I like a little bit of texture just so that there's still some whole bits of nut to chew on in these cookies. So I'm gonna pour this out. And if you're working with a bigger food processor, you can actually do this all the mixing in the bowl of the processor itself. So you could add your flour straight in here, add your sugar in and give it a couple pulses. Because I'm working with a small machine today, I'm gonna do it all in a bowl by hand. So this was 186 grams of nuts, and remember what I said, super easy math, equal parts flour, so it's going to be 186 grams of rye flour, which is what we're using today. Yeah, and an important note I like to kind of talk about when working with kind of the diversity of whole grains is that because each one is from a different agricultural product and each one is coming with its own set of different nutrients and acids and fats, they're going to weigh something different. Think of it like a fresh product. You're using something that has different moisture contents, different ability to absorb water. So when I say 150 or 186 grams of rye flour is going to be a different number of cups than 186 grams of buckwheat flour, it's because they're just simply a different plant. So it's just a good reminder and also a plug that these kind of kitchen scales are pretty useful in any home baking project, and you can get them super affordable. So that's my one tip in terms of equipment. I think you can get away with very little equipment in terms of baking, but I do really advocate for kitchen scales. So we're gonna get to 186 of this rye. And rye is such a beautiful color to bake with because it's kind of like a gray tan, and I think it's very, very stunning. Okay, so we're almost there. Another tip if you want to get really fancy with rye flour is I sometimes like to toast it, which brings a whole different flavor to any baked goods. I think that toasting flour or grains is kind of a sleeper hit in the kitchen. So for example, I just made a cake that had toasted spelt flour in it. So all you do is spread your flour out on a baking sheet and toast it until it is kind of brown on top, and then use it the same as you would in any recipe. You might want to add a tablespoon more or so of liquid, because when you toast something, it evaporates all the moisture out of it. But it's pretty easy to just swap into a recipe, and it adds a whole new complexity of flavor. So this is 186 grams of rye flour, and we're going to see roughly how much that is in cups again. I'm just going to kind of scoop. Actually, I'm going to take a spoon. One way I learned when I was first starting to bake that if you're not using a scale, it's a lot better to spoon your flour into your measuring cup rather than scoop and level. It's just always going to be a little bit more accurate in terms of measurement. All right, so we've got about a cup now, and I'm going to estimate that the rest of this is about another half a cup. So that was also about a cup and a half of rye flour. All right, so we've got rye flour and hazelnuts in the bowl, and we are going to add a teaspoon of salt. I like salt in my cookies, so I added a little more than a teaspoon. And then we are going to weigh out our sugar. And this is going to be 130 grams. And you can always kind of go up and down a little bit in your sugar levels, depending on your taste preference. Be aware that there's like some science around how much you should be decreasing your recipes in terms of sugar, because sugar, yes, it sweetens a cookie, but it also interacts a lot with hydration. So just thinking about ways in which sugar is not just a sweetener, it also affects the flavor profile of other things. So if you're taking sugar out, you might want to think about adding a little bit more salt so that you taste the hazelnuts, or thinking about how it's going to play with the amount of butter, because it does play a pretty important role in terms of some elements of baking. But I also encourage you to play with what works for you. So yeah. I'm missing a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to say that's 2/3 of a cup. And we're just going to stir all of our dries together. You do this with a whisk or your hands. Right. And last thing is going to be our butter. So remember what I said, there's kind of an easy equation for these cookies is equal parts nuts and grain, equal parts sugar and butter. So we want 186 grams grain and nut, 130 grams butter and sugar. All right, so we're gonna weigh out our butter. And this is some like really gorgeous cultured butter, using unsalted butter from the farmer's market. Use any unsalted butter you have. I love baking with cultured butter. But if you have salted butter on hand, you could totally use that and just omit the salt from the recipe. You'll just have a little less control over your salty levels. So my goal is to get to 130 grams of this butter. So we're gonna weigh it out. It's 137. It's not my first rodeo. I'm gonna leave it at that because a little extra 7 grams of butter is never gonna hurt anyone. And I'm just gonna roughly cube it up. And we're using kind of cold room temperature for this recipe. You don't want super soft butter to start with because it'll just kind of turn into a gloopy mess. And you don't want something, solid as a rock. And I just am gonna roughly cube it and go straight into our dries. You can totally do this recipe fully in the food processor, kind of like you would a pie dough, and pulse the butter in. I personally enjoy baking with my hands. So that is the only reason that I am encouraging you to do it with hands is because I think it's fun. A pastry cutter is also a great tool that I really enjoy chopping butter up. So especially if you're using a larger quantity than this, a pastry cutter or a bench scraper, it's a really easy way to just kind of geometrically cube up your butter. And this is where it gets fun. And we're just going to use our hands to kind of break the butter up into a dough so that it'll form a solid mess. And we're just gonna crumble it up. So this is what it looks like to start. We've just got a mass of butter cubes and our grain and nut mixture. And yeah, it's pretty unscientific the way that you go about breaking it up, however feels good to you. You're aiming for a size roughly between like a pea and like a small seed. All right, so we've been mixing with our hands for a couple of minutes, and you can start to see it's gonna be a lot easier to come together in a little mass, especially as the butter kind of softens with the heat of your hands. And you're just still really just crumbling it up. Not too worried about anything too precise. And this is a great time to talk about the hydration of this dough. So if you're working your butter in and you're kind of like, it still feels pretty dry, that's probably just the nature of your flour, and it's just a little thirstier today. So if you notice that even after you've crumbled your butter into like pretty small pieces, it's not necessarily forming a dough. That's a point to just add somewhere between a teaspoon up to a tablespoon or a little more of water. And that'll just make it easier for your whole dough to come together, because our next step is going to be forming this into a little log. So if it doesn't feel like something that's loggable, just add a little bit of water until it comes together. But the caveat is like go slow, because it can go from perfect to a sticky mess really quickly. And we're just going to add some water straight in. Like I said, the end goal is not to make a wet dough, just enough to bring it into a cohesive mass. That's already feeling so much better. This will also depend on how finely ground your nuts were. If they're a little bit coarser, it's just going to be harder to come together, so it might need a little bit more water.
So Katie, if you were adding these ingredients into a food processor, what would you be looking for, keeping an eye on, either sound or visual, to know that it might need a little bit more water?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you were making this dough fully in the food processor and you've gotten to the point where you add your butter, I would really recommend not letting it run and only using the pulse function. So just like pulse, pulse, pulse. You'll see that the butter starts to break up into that like somewhere in the pea-sized range. And then just give it a couple more pulses. And then what you're gonna do is stop it safely, grab a little of the dough in your hand and just ball it. And if it holds its shape as a ball in your hand, you're good to go. At that point, if it's feeling super dry, super coarse and crumbly, add a little teaspoon of water, give it 1 or 2 more pulses, and try that test again in your hand. You don't want to let it run, because the butter is just going to completely blend into the nuts, and then you're going to start to get into that nut butter territory again too. So that's another, plug for using your hands on this, is it's just more the sensory experience and the intuition around when your dough is ready is so much easier to connect to when you're like tangibly holding it. So I've added, I added almost a tablespoon of water, and you can see now that's exactly what I was looking for. It's going to form a ball. And the next step is just to bring this all into a cohesive mass. You can do this in the bowl, which is kind of what I like to get started in. And then what I'm going to do is turn it out on a piece of plastic wrap. And it'll be a lot easier to just form it all into a little ball. All right, so like I said, I kind of pre-masked the dough in the bowl just to make it easier, and I'm going to just dump it right on out onto a sheet of plastic wrap, and you'll see there's kind of all the little bits that didn't come together and this just makes it really easy to do so. I'm a huge supporter of finding ways to decrease our uses of plastic as bakers, because it kind of is a plague. So you could totally do this on a sheet of beeswax fabric, or my favorite tip is to just dump it all into a freezer bag, like a Ziploc baggie that you can rewash, and it's like its own little self-contained vessel. Same goes for pie dough. Anything that like needs to take a rest in the fridge for a little bit, I like to use a Ziploc bag and then just rewash it. And I'm just gonna bring it all together into a little mess. And you can kind of use the table to your advantage to bring it all together. And there you have it, a little cookie dough ball. And it's just gonna take a little nap in the fridge for probably a minimum of a half an hour, just to let the butter and grain and nuts all kind of come together, get to know each other, have a little chat. And one thing I totally forgot to mention is that when you're at the stage of adding all your dry ingredients, that's totally a time that if you want to feel fun about spices or flavors, you could do whatever you want. Depending on the grain or nut you're using, think about what tastes good with them. I think that this hazelnut and rye flavor stands really great on its own, but could definitely withstand, you know, a teaspoon, maybe even 2 teaspoons of cinnamon or ginger or something warm and sweet and comforting. So I totally encourage you at the dry ingredient stage to explore with flavors. You could add a splash of vanilla extract or a different extract that you have. Just be careful with liquid add-ins, as they are going to influence the moisture content. So if you're going to add a little vanilla, you probably aren't going to need that teaspoon of water that I added. So this is going to just go in the fridge, and we're going to get ready to bake in a little bit. All right, so while the dough is taking a rest in the fridge, I'm going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. The dough can totally hang out overnight or longer, depending on your schedule and when you want to bake. But a little bit ahead of time, before you are ready to portion out your cookies, you're going to preheat your oven. All right, so when you're ready to bake, your oven's preheating and your dough has rested in the fridge. It's time to portion them out. And you can do this in a handful of different ways with this recipe, depending on your preference, depending how big you want your cookies. I've found that it's easier to just use some sort of scoop. You could use a tablespoon, you could use a dinner spoon, and just kind of scoop it and form them into little balls. These aren't cookies that are going to change their shape. So basically, like, the shape that you put them on the baking sheet is the shape they're going to come out of the oven in. And another way you could do it, you could roll this into a log and slice it and kind of form them that way. All a matter of personal preference. Because of the nuts, it's a little bit harder to roll and cut this dough. Totally doable. You just would want to work with like a pretty floured surface and not get it too thin, because they'll just totally crumble. So I'm going to use a scoop. We're going to unwrap our plastic wrap. And if it's been in the fridge for a real long time, maybe overnight or a couple days, I would give it a good 15-20 minutes on the counter to come up to temp just a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to be scooping into like ice cream. So I'm just going to take a little bit of dough, and you use the back of your hand to press it into your scoop. And I kind of pull away any scraggly bits. And then I'm just going to roll it into a little ball and press it flat in my hand. Really, that's it. I like them as kind of 1 or 2 bite cookies. These ones, something nice to have after a dinner that's not super filling. But you could totally make them bigger if you wanted something big enough to decorate with icing or something like that. So I lined this baking sheet with parchment paper, and that is another one of those areas where if you're looking to reduce single-use ingredient or supplies in baking, you don't necessarily need to use a piece of parchment paper. I also am a huge proponent of reusing a sheet of parchment paper a handful of times. You can, until it starts to get really brittle from baking too many times, you can reuse it as many times as you want. And you could also invest in a slip mat, which is something that is a washable kind of non-stick surface that you put on a baking sheet, and that way you aren't throwing away pieces of parchment paper each time you bake. Also, these cookies aren't super at risk of sticking because they're pretty self-contained, so you could 100% get away with not using anything if you really wanted to get wild. Sometimes I kind of like form these like a little patty in the crux of my thumb and index finger. I've just found that it kind of rounds out the edges nicely. But you'll find whatever rhythm that feels good to make these cookies for yourself. These cookies are like ideal for playing with different add-ins. So at this stage, you could totally take your thumb and put a little indent. Sometimes it cracks a little bit. And then you've got a thumbprint cookie that you can fill with jam. You could put chocolate chip right there, a little chunk of shredded, like kind of like a shard of dark chocolate bars, something I really love to do right there. You could bake them and not fill the little thumb indent until they come out of the oven, and put a scoop of lemon curd, any curd. Yeah, they're really, really flexible. And another thing you can do is make them a little thinner, and you've got a perfect platform for a sandwich cookie. So after you come out of the oven, fill this with a buttercream, some sort of delicious chocolate ganache, and smush them together, and they're super perfect for that. I think the thumbprint cookie is one of my favorite ways to make these. All right, so we've got our cookies portioned out, and like I said, these aren't really going anywhere once they're in the oven. They're not really gonna spread, they're not gonna puff up, so you can crowd them pretty close together, and this is pretty much the shape they're gonna come out of the oven with. I mentioned this earlier, I'm a salt fan in baked goods, so I'm gonna finish them just with a little bit of flaky salt, because I think most things are made better by that. You could also do this with coarse sugar if you were a little bit more on the sweet side. All right, that's it. Pretty no frills cookies. They're just gonna go in the oven. It's been preheated to 350 for somewhere in the 10 to 12 minute range. I would rotate them at about 7 minutes and just kind of see how they're doing. And because we're using a grain that has a color, that's just going to affect how easy it is to visually spot when these cookies are done. The darker the colored grain you're using, it just becomes a little harder to, say like, oh, that's a done cookie, as opposed to if you're using a really, really light all-purpose white flour. And you're looking for just firm set edges, and if you press on the top of the cookie, you don't want it to feel like raw dough. So these are the cookies right before going in the oven. All right, so these cookies been in for about 12 minutes, maybe closer to 13. I'm not very scientific when it comes to timing in baking, so that's a fault of mine. But we're going to take these out. You can smell when they're getting super toasty and ready to be done. And also the timing is going to depend a little bit on how thick you make your cookies. The bigger they are, the longer they're going to take. So you can tell they've got a little bit of color, especially on the nuts here on the top. They're starting to brown. And one way I like to test with a cookie that has a little bit more color to the grain in the first place, because they're not gonna be immediately recognizable as done, is to give a little bottom check. And you can see it started to get a little bit of that caramelization. I have baker's hands, so I can touch extremely hot cookies. You might want to use a spatula for that move. And these are good to go. They'll still be a little soft to the touch, and they're just gonna kind of firm up as they cool. So there's gonna be a little bit of residual baking that goes on, and then as the butter kind of re-solidifies, they're still gonna crisp up. So don't be too worried if there's still a little bit of give when you take them out. But other than that, they're ready to go. They smell so good, and as you can tell, they're not like the most elaborate looking cookies, but they're super delicious, super simple, and really easy to make, and really easy to customize. So that's it.
All right, we've got Katie's delicious hazelnut and rye flour cookies, pretty fresh out of the oven. They've cooled down. Little 2 or 3 or maybe even 1 bite cookie. It's delicious.
Heather, that was great.
Yeah,
Hi.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We're so excited. I'm still enjoying that salad dressing, the hazelnut salad dressing. I picked up more greens this past weekend at the farmer's market, as well as hazelnuts from Sungold Farm, because I ate that entire first batch of granola, and I needed to make another. So I got some more hazelnuts from Sungold, who also sells flour. And then Katie, I think, mentioned Lonesome Whistle Farm, who sells at PSU. We used their oats and grains. So please, everyone, follow Katie on Instagram and see what she's up to. She makes incredible cakes to order using local grains. And she also recently wrote a really beautiful blog post for us called "The Flavors of Baking with the Flavors of Local Grains." I will drop Katie's article that she wrote for the PFM blog in the chat, and then I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying over. This is such an exciting event. We have gone quite over time, so thanks for sticking around.